I mean, it's admirable that he's still alive.
I don't know. Oh,
someone's probably going to steal that keyboard. Not because they want it, but because it's absolutely insane to listen to those things.
no, we need to get rid of the ping pong table. That's what needs to happen. That is driving me crazy. Okay, so here's, you want this? To have both.
You're going to stay close to enough to me that they'll be able to do it.
I will use that. Get out of the way. And I'll introduce you as the host. And then you can say stuff.
Test that work-wise. One or two times before you start shopping.
Up here.
Up here.
You can't see it. Right. Rock on, sister. Raise your hand if you're here for the SEO meetup. Excellent. This isn't it. This is Introduction to Sushi. Thank you for coming. We're here in the beautiful Centerline Digital Digs tonight. John Lane was nice enough to offer it up to us one day after we drooled through it. We've got two people that you can't see. Oh, they're down at the bottom there on the big screen. Alan from California, Jaimie from New York. You'll be hearing from them in just a couple of minutes. But I wanted to give John a minute to say hello and to introduce his beautiful space.
Hello. Welcome to our beautiful space. No, really, welcome to Centerline. We're really happy to have you all tonight. I think this is a good test for us because people we've had in this space so far. So welcome. Hope you all got comfortable, got yourself something to drink. Let me tell you, like, for 2 seconds, a couple of things that you might want to know. First of all is that there is Wi-Fi in here. If you don't know already, it's the CLP Wireless 2, and the password is Star Wars is awesome, all lowercase. The other thing is, I'll be happy to take everybody on a, this is just half the space, there's another half up there. When we're done here, if anybody's interested, I'll be happy to organize a tour. We can go upstairs to see the rest of the workspace upstairs. And what you'll see is the space where we do what we do, and we are a content marketing agency. We do content planning, we do social media management, we do content creation in the form of video, animation, mobile apps, websites, sales tools, you name it, we make it, and we make it all right here. Everything happens in-house. We do it for people like IBM and Google, Jaimie, and Lowe's. So again, the magic really happens up there. This is just a place that we bring happen. So hope everybody enjoys the SEO meetup.
Thank you, sir. So this is going to be an interesting meetup. We try to only do one truly nerdy meetup every 6 or 9 months. But it looks like there's a lot of nerds here, or nerd wannabes. How many people here have written HTML from scratch? How many people have no idea and think they're completely over their head here tonight? That's not bad. Only a few. I'm happy you're here, my brother. So let me introduce who else is here. Who's going to flick them up on the big screen? Thank you. First is, Alan, how do you pronounce your last name? Bleisweiss?
Bleisweiss.
Bleisweiss. Alan is well known as a horrific SEO auditor that gives people huge, massive amounts of work to do after he's done doing a forensic audit of their site. He's been doing it a long time. He's got a huge knowledge and background in all the technical aspects that go into a site. You'll hear a lot of interesting stuff from him tonight. Our other guest from New York, Jaimie, what part of New York are you from?
Right above New York City. No, just right above New York City. I can walk to the Bronx. So, we're in downstate New York, but depending on who you talk to, no matter who you talk to, if you're in the city, you're upstate. So.
So how I wanted to start this was talking through what we mean by technical SEO, because everybody's got a different idea of what it is. So I'm going to tell you what I think about it, then I'm going to let these guys talk about what they think about it, and in the end, you guys will all be technical SEO experts. So when I think about SEO, I think about my life before I understood search optimization. I was just coding away. I never thought about findability at all on the web. That's why I worked for a newspaper, because nobody's looking for them. They just get found. It was very easy. And then as I started to learn about SEO, it suddenly clicked in my head, this whole idea of if you can't be found on the web, it doesn't matter how beautiful your site is, because no one will ever see that beauty. And that was really a turning point for me. And whenever I talk to developers, I talk about that turning point where once you understand the basics of SEO and how it impacts at even a code level the work that you're doing, you can never go back. You can never unsee the behind-the-curtain SEO stuff that can kind of go in at that bottom level. If you were lucky enough to win the handout lottery, just understand that there's no way we could put everything in that handout, which, by the way, you can just download from the Meetup site if you didn't get one. So listen, take a lot of notes. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff covered here. But let me throw it to Alan, and he will talk through what he thinks about when somebody says technical SEO.
Okay, how y'all doing tonight? Excellent. All right, so the concept of technical SEO is really straightforward when you step back and you understand what's happening. The web is a visual medium. It's all about what you see and process when you see it. But in order for search engines to be able to get as close as they can to providing an ideal answer to searchers' questions and queries, those search engines need to be able to digest the information that's out on the web. And while Google's standard line used to be just write good content, and they layered on top of that, let us figure it out, the web is just too vast and too diverse on so many levels that it's literally impossible for them to do a very good job with that. And then it just gets even more complicated when you get spammers involved who want to game the system. They want to be able to manipulate the results to their liking. So technical SEO is the process of being able to put a framework or a structure around that content, whether it's written text or it's images or video, in a way that the search engines can better process and understand what's going on. And you don't need to be a developer in order to understand the importance of quality technical SEO. SEO, even as evolved as it's become now, has, its throwback is information retrieval, going back to old library systems. In the brick and mortar world, when you walk into a library, every book is on the shelves is supposedly good content. How do you get to the right book on the right shelf? There's got to be a methodology for sorting it all out. So that's all SEO really is. It's just a much more complicated process than the old Dewey Decimal System. And that's especially true now more than ever. You see a lot of sites that use responsive design or fluid design or HTML5 that they can do visually powerful things and present content in visually appealing ways like never before. But just because you can do something with today's technology to make it visually appealing doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it from an SEO perspective. The search engines still need to be able to have standardized, structured methods for what they're providing. And so from one deeper example of technical SEO considerations, when you're creating a site or you're upgrading your existing 8-year-old or 10-year-old site to a more fluid design or a responsive design model, you need to really be aware that if you don't consider SEO from the beginning, you're going to have serious problems. For example, I've now done several audits on sites that had been originally old school HTML and are now responsive design. Most recently, this was a 20 million page website, and when they rolled it out, they came to me after they launched, which is all good and fine because you eventually realize you need to consider SEO. But if you do it after you launch, you can have really serious problems. In this particular example, 20 million pages after the responsive design rollout, the number of pages not found skyrocketed to 4.5 million pages. That's almost 10% of the entire site was gone as far as search engines were concerned. The content still existed, and you could still get to it if you were a human user, but only if you were using a current browser and you had all the functionality of that current browser activated. So when you're working on things, or you're working with a development team or a design agency or your own in-house team for wanting to come out with the newest and latest visually appealing experience, make sure somebody thinks about the fact that SEO has to be a factor in the methods you choose. You know, it's the same thing for HTML5. Just because you can use multiple H1 header tags within an HTML5 environment doesn't mean you should. The H1 tag from an SEO perspective literally says this is the most important topic for this specific page. So if you have multiple H1 tags, in one case I saw there was 27 H1 tags on one page, you're literally confusing the message to the search engines about what is important, what this page is all about, what are the topics, what are the subtopics. If you've got a responsive design, you need to have a no-script version of your site at the code level so that they can properly crawl your site. Just because Google says they can read JavaScript or that they can understand Ajax doesn't mean they can read JavaScript sufficiently enough, or that they can understand the content within an Ajax box specific to the page where that Ajax box is loading that content. So have a no-script version of the site. Very critical. Make sure that you've got full pagination within the no-script environment, because even if a responsive design system allows you for endless scrolling of content, you no longer need to click 5, 10, 20 pages to get to content. That's for the user and their visual experience. It's not ideal for search engines. So you need to have full pagination with all that that entails, including having Google's rel next and rel prev tags. Don't put those tags in the navigation. Make sure they're in the header area at the code level. You want to make sure that you've got unique URLs that you can present to the search engines so that each URL can be properly indexed. All of these are factors at the technical level that are critical to helping the search engines understand what content exists in the way that's ideally suited for their ability to understand it, to present it when different searches take place. And that's where SEO best practices comes from, the perspective of technical SEO being so vital to the overall presentation experience.
Hey, Alan, let me jump in and give Jaimie a shot here.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Get a picture. So I wanted to give each of them a few minutes to kind of tell you where they're going with it. Trust me when I tell you, any three of these guys could talk for an hour straight. They all have a lot of knowledge in their head. But let me introduce Jaimie Sirovich, who wrote a book on SEO with PHP. Is that right, Jaimie?
This is actually the ASP.NET version because it's all I had lying around. But it's a little outdated now. There's probably some bad advice, but the cool part is that some of the advice I gave mirrors some of what Google addressed later. And there was no way to do, for example, canonical when I first realized this was a problem to have multiple things in various categories all over the place, and that was duplicate content. And duplicate content is wrong, but for usability and humans, you want the duplicate content. So it has to function for humans. And what Google's been doing, at least my assessment, is that over the years, Google's been admitting that there are perhaps some things that you have to help them with and that they would rather you help them with. And there's all this micro format stuff, and there's canonicals, and there's rel next and rel prev, and all these things have helped over the years. And a lot of what we deal with today and a lot of what people are obsessed about is eliminating duplicate content and making sure that that your site is best able to be spidered by both humans and robots. And while those things frequently do overlap, while they do frequently coincide, they don't always. And one of the best examples of that is faceted search. And faceted search is a huge problem, and it's a problem I've been attacking for years. And it's great for humans, but without some sort of checks, without some sort of boundaries for the robots, what you'll do is you'll send them an enormous spider trap. And there are a lot of optimizations you can make and a lot of hints you can give Google to help Google properly digest your website. One of the
Jaimie,
things that
hold on one sec.
Sorry. Are
there people here? That's all right. Are there people here who don't know what faceted search is? Faceted search? All right, you're going to have to back up, Jaimie. Explain a little bit about faceted search for the non-nerds here.
So faceted search, a lot of people don't realize that it's there, but it's just, the great part of it is you don't really have to think about it. It's that stuff on the left side, on the big box stores, on the high-end websites, you always see these filters on the side, and you have an example. You have, for example, a color filter. You have, for example, a price filter. You have, for example, a material filter. And what it does is it gives you a vocabulary to work with. So instead of having to know what you want and know the keywords of exactly what you want and run one query, you can then refine a more basic query. Like, so if you're looking, for example, for a digital camera, you would type digital camera. But you would have to work at that point to decide whether you want a Sony or you want a 10 megapixel one or a 15 megapixel. God only knows what we're up to now. I forgot. But what faceted search lets you do is give your surfers an interface so they don't have to know a priori exactly what they want. They can decide things a little bit as they go along, and you can walk them through it. So if you want me to do a screen share, I could, for example, pull up one of the examples that, you can find it on Amazon, you can find it on Endless, you can find it on Best Buy, on all of the big box stores. That is the form of navigation that humans are becoming accustomed to over the years. And I think everyone's seen it, but they might not necessarily perceive, or they'll just naturally know how to use it, which are the best interfaces. When you don't have to think, those are the best interfaces of all, right? So, but those are a huge problem for bots.
Faceted search. You've seen it at Amazon where it'll show you, like you're saying, digital cameras, and then it'll say SLR digital camera, or cameras over $500, cameras under $300, that sort of thing, that as you click those boxes, the search criteria grow, adding parameters to that URL string. Well, he's talking about the way that adding those additional queries that are inevitably touching against the database to bring data back can sometimes impact the way your final road to the product can show up. So maybe the first time you go there, it's in the handout, I talked a little bit about it, you say, I want a red medium sweatshirt. The next time you go there, you say, I want a sweatshirt that's red, or that's medium and red. So all the parameters there, but they're in different order. So the URL is different, but the page that you're looking at is the same. So sometimes that's looked at by Google as a separate page, but the content on it is identical. Sorry, go ahead, Jaimie.
So I can put that on screen if you want me to do a screen share, but I think everyone has seen it. The unfortunate part of this, though, is that you can't once you unleash a spider trap like this, and there are a few different approaches. Once you unleash a spider trap like this, you basically have a big problem, and there are an infinite number of pages. And that's one of these things that you run into a lot. You run into these things that may be useful for humans, but they're really horrible for robots because you have no idea which vocabularies are useful to Google unless you do collective intelligence and you figure out maybe people are looking, for example, Nikon digital cameras, but they're not looking for Nikon digital cameras under $50 on sale in red. And while faceted search lets you do that, and that might be useful to a human, those queries do not actually do anything useful for Google. They don't feed it any useful information. And it may not be it may not be duplicate content, but it's what I call superfluous content. That's my word for it. It's extra content that it's total, it's total crap as far as Google's concerned. It doesn't want to see it. It might be useful for humans, but it's a very, very specific need. So one of the things you have to do when you feed this information to Google is limit what it can see, and you can do that through various methods. You can hand pick them. You can use algorithms that select them based on how many humans have actually navigated to that page. That starts getting a little sophisticated and hairy, but these are some of the approaches that the larger enterprise platforms use when they want to close off that spider trap. But I've actually seen, and if anyone wants to pull apart B&H Photo, which is it's a very big retailer, everyone knows it. They just totally close off the spider trap because they didn't want to figure it out, and they're throwing away thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of traffic by doing that. What they really should be doing, and if anyone from B&H is in the audience, I seriously doubt it, but it's possible. They might want to think about selectively opening up that spider trap, but not actually opening up the spider trap. So you don't want to throw away the bad. You don't want to throw away the good stuff. You want to throw away the bad stuff. And it's interesting that Alan brought up the Dewey Decimal System. Basically, what faceted navigation is an alternative invented by an Indian computer scientist, or I think it was a mathematician actually, called Ranganathan. I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing his name correctly, but that was actually one of the alternatives to the Dewey Decimal System and the Library of Congress system, which are single category based. What faceted search really is, it's a way to combine various categories. And whenever you hear the word combine and combine in any order, you know you're opening up a spider trap by definition. You end up with a large amount of content, and you have to sort of curate that content and make sure that you serve the right content. And I can discuss what the proper methods are to do that. And but the most important thing to realize is that there is this category of content that might be actually useful for humans, but isn't useful for bots. And that designing, like Alan said, designing for humans sometimes is not the best way to go. Sometimes you want to design for humans, but take special precautions for robots. And what you don't want to do is design all this stuff, and then hope it works, because then you hire Alan at the end and you pay him a lot of money to go and fix your stuff. So what you want to think about some of this ahead of time. You won't necessarily get it all right, but fixing it afterwards is much, much more difficult and much, much more expensive. And sometimes you don't have a choice, but one of the best examples, or the best recent example of what you can do to harm search engines but help humans is faceted search. The oldest example I can think of is, what about showing text and images? Well, it might look better, but it's not digestible to robots. And over time, we have some new technology, some new font rendering technologies that exist now, but there is no technology yet to help robots deal with faceted search without some special precautions and some special compromises that you can make to allow robots to digest your website. Like Alan also said, you want to address these things, and if you don't, it's at your peril. You'll lose a lot of your great content, and robots will not see it. So that's my roundabout explanation. I hope it was intelligible.
Thanks, Jaimie. So, hold on, get a double mic. So the last one of our triumvirate here works with me at Verante, and he is our, what is your title? Senior Application Developer. So he is interesting because he's not a pure SEO, but he spent his entire life working as an SEO developer, which was perfect for Verante. Also has the #1 Chrome plugin for SEOs, which is, what's it called, Site Tools? SEO Site Tools. He's not going to get to his slide yet, don't worry. But Carter Cole will talk a little bit about what he thinks about when we say technical SEO.
Okay, so I feel like technical SEO is really about the data that Google and the search engines actually finally get to see and how they are actually crawling and indexing your site. So it's the code that they see, it's what you have to tell your developers they have to implement and they're going to complain about. I think it's interesting that a lot of developers don't have a background in SEO. Oh, I need to look at the camera. Because it's really important. And there's a lot of simple things, and once you got them, it's really easy to implement and pay attention to. So that's really what I think about technical SEO is, what do you have to tell your developers that they need to focus on, and what's Google going to see that their algorithms are going to try and interpret into the stuff. A lot of people kind of feel like Google is magic, but if you go and you read their patents and you read the stuff that they're using, it's all statistics and things that have been done in the, by the universities for years, and they're just implementing it and using it. And so they run into the same problems that everyone else does, and they have the same, implementation problems that everyone else does. So you can help them by making it easier for them to find those things. I don't have that much to say. Where do you want to go?
Not that I wasn't paying attention. Thanks, Carter. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of it. Each one of these guys is going to get somewhere between 15 minutes and 4 hours to talk, depending on when they stop. And I'm really just going to go down the line. So they've each kind of picked a little bit of what they want to talk about. Probably be a little bit of overlap. But we'll start off with Alan and just pray that he doesn't have to do any typing because he's got the world's loudest keyboard with him. But go ahead, Alan. It's all yours.
Well, interestingly enough, of course, I'm used to speaking at conferences in person, and this is new for me, the first time I'm doing a format of this nature, and I completely blew the timeline. When you asked me to just give a brief overview of my understanding of technical SEO, I dove right into what I was going to talk about.
That's all right, no biggie.
So it'll probably be less than 4 hours, probably 3. No, seriously. The concepts, we've already all touched on the importance of understanding that you need to understand and consider how the search engines are going to look at your content and process it and evaluate it. That's what everything comes down to. It's always been about how do the search engines see what you're communicating and what are they understanding is happening. With HTML5 and responsive design, it's just one example in the latest long evolution of how you can create a website and present your content and the message that you want to communicate for users to experience from a user's unique process intellectually, emotionally, right? And somebody is typing away in the background. Just wanted to mention that I could hear that. And it wasn't me, so don't blame me. Anyhow, so as you're working on your websites, it's critical to understand that the search engine's primary goal is to be able to perceive user experience, but it's filtered through their algorithms. So you can only mathematically go so far in being able to digest what's taking place on the site and what the specific topic is for an individual page and what are the supporting points of information that reinforce what that topical focus is about, and how one page relates to another in a sectional level as well as across an entire site, and then how other sites relate to that, as well as social media. All of these are factors, and all of these are digested through the multiple algorithms that Google has. They don't just have one algorithm anymore. It's long since past the days where there's just one algorithm. And you don't just have one team working on it. You've got the web spam team that looks for people who are trying to game the system. And then you've got the web quality team where they only care about the quality of the user experience, right? So you've got all of these hands involved, multiple points, and it's a legacy system now all of these years later into the process where the page rank is no longer necessarily the most important factor. So just because a page has a high page rank or a website has a high domain authority based on tools that you might use to help you understand how you're doing doesn't mean that you've got everything in the right sequence or the right order, or you're presenting it in an ideal way anymore. There are too many other factors that need to be considered. And the further we go down into the rabbit hole of methods for communicating, the less likely the tools that you may be using already are going to help you to really understand what's truly going on. And as a result of that, with technical SEO being a serious consideration, let me talk briefly again. I'll recap the concept of HTML5 and responsive design, and then I'll dig a little further into some other considerations from the technical perspective. So with HTML5, just because you can do it doesn't mean the search engines can properly digest it. With responsive design, what may be a great user experience may completely block the search engine's ability to actually separate out topical focus. So as you're rolling out any technology, whether it's an existing technology or a technology that hasn't even been thought of yet, make sure that somebody is responsible for checking that the SEO considerations are weighed equally as important to the visual experience of a user. Best practices are absolutely to make sure that you have a no-script variation of your web content and include things like true full pagination into the no-script version. Integrate schema.org markup at the code level so that the search engines can better have a chance at understanding what all of the information is on a given page, and focus more on validation now than ever before. So the W3C schools, the World Wide Web Consortium, offers a simple testing tools that you can test the markup by dropping a URL into their test form and submitting that, and within a matter of moments their system will come back and tell you how many errors exist at the code level, and there's a separate test for your style sheets that you can also run on that same page. And while you don't necessarily need to get perfection when it comes to your code or your style sheets, what I have found in the audit work that I've been doing in the last year and a half since HTML5 and now responsive design have become more prevalent is that more and more errors are occurring at the code and the style sheet level. And if you end up having 200 or 300 errors in your markup, you're more likely to have a situation where the Google and Bing crawlers are going to have a difficult time crawling your content, and then the multiple layers of algorithms that exist are going to have more difficulty understanding all of the different relationships that they need to evaluate when they're processing a single page, a section of a site, or an entire site. So take some time to reinforce the importance of clean code and of simplification of code and style sheets wherever possible to try and avoid that.
Hey, Alan, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Hold on. So he was talking about validation through the W3C, and I can remember when Ashley used to talk, she would also talk about validating the CSS through that same validator or a brother validator. Have you found any type of correlation between CSS validation and crawlers being able to get through a site? I'm pretty sure the HTML one, I can see a direct correlation, but I'm not so sure about style sheets.
Right. So it's not just about the crawlers. The crawlers are only the first process. They need to be able to find the content. CSS quite often now integrates a lot of references to images, among other things, that those crawlers are going to want to find, and that relates to one of the next areas I'm going to be talking about with page speed problems that can quite often happen because of style sheet implementation being poor. Where the problem goes further, though, is once the content is crawled, the algorithms have to go to work to try and figure out everything that's going on. What is the topic? What is the message? How does one piece of content relate to another? And style sheets are absolutely a part of that process because of the way that now more than ever style sheets pull in images, especially for images. It's not as critical as the markup validation in that regard, but it does play a role, and it has different impacts, multiple layers of impact that I'm going to be talking about in a little bit that can absolutely have a very severe negative consequence on your site's SEO. Does that work for you?
That works for me.
Okay, good. So let's talk about the concept of page speed as being just one consideration.
Yes.
Right? Page speed is absolutely a significant indicator of a user experience and the quality of that user experience. But again, understand, just because you can go to a page and all of a sudden you see content loading right away and you can begin reading, even if other processes are happening in the background, doesn't mean that that's good for SEO. First aspect, when the crawlers are crawling your site, they process everything that they find and they want to dig and dig and dig. So if you're referencing, and I don't know if you can see this chart clearly on the big screen, but this is a screenshot of just one page's processes and functions that take place. And when you've got 120 images that are referenced in style sheets, you may not in fact load every image, every page, as every page is presented. Some of those images are only referenced on some pages, or depending on other functionality that's going on for some pages or certain sections of the site. But just by the fact that you've got 120 images referenced in your style sheet means that the crawler is going to call your server 120 times just in processing that one page to see if it can discover what are all of those images and are these images we care about. So style sheets, that's a big number. This is a radically big example, but I use this example because it's a serious consideration. And there are certain page speed testing tools that you want to use that you can help to understand what's happening, because Google does offer some depth of understanding of where the bottlenecks may occur in the Google Analytics page speed section, but it leaves a lot to be desired. One of the tools I used to use was Pingdom to test speed, but what I discovered was Pingdom does not process a page the same way the Google bot does. So if Google is reporting that the average page load is 8 seconds or 12 seconds or 15 seconds, you could go to Pingdom and see, oh look, it's 800 milliseconds. I'm going to ignore Google. You can't afford to do that because Google uses only their data when they decide if a page speed is sufficient enough both for user experience evaluation, but as a drain on their own processing systems. And then it's also as compared to your competitors. So I don't use Pingdom anymore. I use URIvalet.com, .org rather, URIVALET, and a couple others. I also use, bear with me, webpagetest.org. Both give you quality representations as to what Google might be seeing, but they give you more insight into where the bottlenecks might be taking place. And so you want to look at that and you want to keep an eye on that. Other issues that impact page speed are content delivery networks are now quite common. The problem is most content delivery networks are quite inefficient when they're free or they're low cost, or even if they're a high-end content delivery network. If you don't execute the implementation properly at the code level, you can end up having bottlenecks. Or even if you execute it properly, if you're calling 100 images from a content delivery network, that's not going to be faster than if you have those images on your own server, because now, even if their servers are fast, that's 100 additional calls to a third-party provider's web server outside of your network. So every one of those calls is another potential delay as Google's system and Bing's system are trying to pull that data into their index. So those are very significant. Other page speed issues that I find quite often are when you have multiple scripts on a page serving up advertising blocks within the page. That's even worse when you've got 2 or 3 ad networks. Now all of a sudden you have several different scripts. Many times those can actually conflict with each other in a way that causes Google's systems to become confused, either in the crawl process or in this scenario in the algorithmic process. And there's delays in the time that it takes to actually digest that and evaluate it. So you need to be aware of that as being another quite common potential problem. As you deal with page speed, you can use Google Analytics if you've got Google Analytics installed. They offer page speed data. Take a look at that, and the default is for the most recent 30 days what the average page speed is. But be aware that even there you can look and see individual pages and look at the most visited pages. If any one of them has a really high page speed, that's a potential problem for giving that speed a low grade compared to the overall site. You can also break it down. Google gives you more depth that you can do research within their own system, so I encourage you to do that. And then expand the date range that you're looking at page speed to a 60 or a 90-day period. And what you want to do there is you want to look at the timeline of the average page speeds, and you can then actually, in fact, look for spikes where the overall page speed might be 3 or 4 seconds, but if you have 3 or 4 days in a month where that's spiked to 15 or 20 seconds, that can hurt you as well. And that's a really useful piece of information because that could potentially point to the fact that there are occasional problems on your own server's network. In that scenario, you can have a dialogue with your hosting provider saying, we've got 3 or 4 days a month where the page speed is just completely horrific. And if Google is crawling your content on those days, you're going to suffer as a result of that. The other last thing that I want to touch on when it comes to technical SEO is not necessarily as technical specific to the markup or the way that the algorithms process information purely at a technical level. Now I'm talking about actual signals that exist where it's a combination of technical as well as content and user specific. And if you've got multiple signals communicating different messages that Google or Bing use when they're evaluating one thing to consider, you're going to have problems. And here's one example. The robots.txt file is supposed to be the final say in how search engines process your site's content. So you can literally say, don't index this entire section of my website. The problem with relying on just one signal, in this case the robots.txt file, for all of your SEO concerns about one aspect of what your message is that their systems are now so multi-layered and so multifaceted that what used to be a directive as strong as the robots.txt file is now much more shaky in its ability to be trusted as enough of a message. If you've got a robots.txt that says don't include this content, but then on the pages themselves, if you've got a no index follow command in the page headers, you're telling the search engine something quite different than you are in the robots.txt file. You're saying, oh, we don't want you to index this, but by the way, we do want you to crawl these pages because there's content in here that we want you to see. That's a mixed message. If you then throw in canonical tags at the tag level in the header that say, these pages over here are what we care about, there could be confusion as well. If you've got enough links pointing to content that you're telling the search engines to ignore in the robots file, or if you've got third-party sites linking to those pages, I have in the past year seen situations where Google ignores the robots.txt files instruction. Yeah. So that's just one very serious consideration. But when you look at other factors, there's other ways that you can send mixed signals. Your page title might have one message. The URL might convey something different. The breadcrumbs that lead to a page could use different words in the anchor text. The overwhelming volume of content on the page could communicate a different topical focus than what you're communicating in your page titles. What is the anchor text that people are using to link to those pages off of your site? What's the message coming from social media about the topical focus? All of these are different touch points that communicates the topical focus. And you need to make sure there's consistency across as many of those touch points as possible. But at the same time, now that spam has become so problematic, you also need to understand the need for balance in that. So it's become an art form to understand how to paint the overall message in a way that doesn't go too far. You know, the over-optimization algorithm changes that Google made in 2012 are part of that consideration. Penguin update, big consideration for going too far. The problematic inbound links coming from low-quality sites where they're built around specific keywords. Or if you own several sites and you embed one particular keyword anchor text in your site's footers pointing to another one of your websites, that's going too far with the signal strength. So it's a balancing act. But the bottom line from my consideration is the fact that technical SEO and the nuances of all of the different ways you can send signals to the search engines all are serious considerations. They're more important than ever, and Google has long since passed the days when let us figure it out was good enough. So just be aware that as you go about your work and as you collaborate with developers, with designers, with the marketing message, everybody needs to have at least a foundational understanding of what SEO means in 2013, and it needs to be a consideration earlier on in the process, more now than ever before. I think that's all I'm going to want to focus on. I've taken up more than enough time. I want to be fair to the other guys because they're really intelligent, they're really skilled, and let's leave it to them to continue it.
Hey, Alan, I got one question for you that came in from Jenny Hallis about the, what? Is it not on? The big one. The big one? Now? She was asking about, there's a plugin for Google Chrome that tests page speed according to Google's algorithm. Have you seen that or used it, Alan?
I have not personally used it. The only thing that I can suggest is that you need to do some comparative testing to make sure that you're getting information that's going to be helpful and not cause confusion. And this is why I personally like URI Valet. They provide page speed approximation across different connection types, and I look at the 3 megabit per second numbers in that, and then I also look at the webpagetest.org. You can run a test there, and then you can run a second test. The second test there will actually give you the cached page speed, so ignore that when you're doing comparative checks. And then if you're using the Google Chrome plugin and you see that there's parity across at least a handful of different pages, you should be good to go to rely on that as a regular source.
I'll tell you one. I'll tell you one Google Chrome plugin that I do like. Hold on. I have a little technical snafu. I don't know what that is. Are you guys hearing that loud noise where you are?
Yeah.
All right. We're going to try to figure out what the problem is.
I'm actually not hearing any loud
I have
noise.
no idea what the problem is. But John is on it. Thank you.
It was a noise spammer.
I don't know what it is. Yes. Very heavy rain started. It must be it. So I'll just yell. So there's one great Google Chrome plugin that you can use that makes sure, you can't hear? All right, hold on. I can hear me.
I'm not hearing any noise. I hope it's not me, because I hear nothing.
Where's that noise coming from?
Now I hear it.
Oh, it is? Hold on, guys. We've got a rogue speaker.
A rogue speaker, that would be me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know what happened, but I'm taking full credit for that. So I wanted to say there's one Google Chrome plugin for anyone who uses a Chrome browser. I forget what it's called, but if you search for analytics tag, it sits up there, and on some pages I bump into, it will say this page is double tagged in analytics or has no Google Analytics installed. I was talking to a person today who has thousands of pages on her site and has to change all of them by hand on occasion, which is horrific to think about. But a tool like that becomes very helpful when you have something like that that you have to deal with. Have you missed a page that has your analytics tag, or have you double tagged it when you're not supposed to be?
There's also one that Google put out that will actually let you see the calls that you get sent to Google Analytics, and so that's really helpful when you're trying to diagnose why your page events aren't firing or your things like that.
Yeah, there's a bunch for Firefox as well as for Chrome that can help you diagnose problems like that.
There's some general idea for order. For example, a fucking robot with an app.
Here, hold on. Can you get him the thingy? Or did John take it away?
Here, I can take that.
Tiny mic.
Yeah. Hold on. When Martin speaks, we want to listen. That's just for the internet.
So I seem to remember that there was a sense of order here, that there are macro commands such as robots, and then there could be inline conflicts. In that situation, the macros would always win over the inline. Are there any kind of macro rules like that that will give us an indication about how Google is processing the commands so that even if we have a conflict, it may or may not matter?
Well, the goal is to not have a conflict. Yes. Which is basically what Alan was just talking about. When you send those mixed signals, Google has to make a best guess at which one to go with. Alan, do you want to handle that about, do you know the precedence? Which one is going to take precedence over Robox, Meta Robots tag, no index, no follow, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, again, unfortunately, this is a situation where they're imperfect in their execution, and the multiple algorithms cause inefficiencies in the decision-making process. Ultimately, robots.txt should, by all rights, be the final authority. I only know that I've seen situations where it's been ignored, but that's when there are when there's too much weight coming from other lower level signaling.
Yeah, I mean,
So there's no specific hierarchy evaluation other than standardized. Robots.txt is supposed to be the ultimate authority. Canonical tag implementation would be next. But again, if you've got 5,000 websites all linking to a page that you're saying something else to do with, their inability to understand proper trust can sometimes override reality.
Yeah, that was the problem that we found. We found that we were only as strong as our weakest links in. And so no matter what our robots said, if we still were linking in either externally or internally, then the spider was in, and once it was in all over, you know?
Right.
And so that was the problem we had. It was like trying to put your finger in the dike. And at first there was just a little tiny trickle, and then once the spider was inside there, man, it saw the entire goddamn lake, you know? And so we tried to essentially create Fort Knox, and then just gave up because it was just too complex.
Right. Well, at a certain point, I've seen other horrific situations over the past year, and as Phil mentioned, when you bring me in, you need to first prepare yourselves for the worst. It doesn't mean I'm always going to give you a worst-case scenario document at the end of the process. Quite often, most of the time, it's not that severe, but once in a while, it gets that bad, and hopefully you're going to want to be able to end up getting one of these from me, because that's what you want to be able to. You want to be able to survive my audit cycle. But I have seen another example of a problem that I've seen is telling Google, we have 35,000 pages we no longer want you to index, even though we previously wanted you to index them. And how do you do that? I've seen Google ignore 404s for more than 6 months. And people have gone to the radical extreme of 410. I've seen people switch to a 307 redirect, which is a special circumstance temporary redirect that really isn't very effective. But you can sometimes become desperate in what you try to do. And I empathize. The truth, though, is the overwhelming majority of the time, what it comes down to is how critical is this one specific problem compared to everything else I'm dealing with, and are there other things I can be focusing on that will compensate in a way that justifies the time and expense involved devoted to those instead of trying to fix this problem. So it's picking and choosing your battles accordingly.
All right, let's move on to Jaimie, who loves talking about e-commerce and that horrible faceted search we were talking about a little bit earlier. Now, if Jaimie gets too geeky and starts getting too deep in the weeds, raise your hand if he's gone past something that you want him to back up and kind of take a step back and tell you what that's about, like we did with faceted search. It's all you, Jaimie.
It's all me. So, hi, I'm a geek. That's how I was introduced, at least. Let me start with the same technique that that Alan did and try to hold up a slide. But we'll see if this actually works. I'm kind of curious if everyone can read that. Does that actually work?
Yeah, we can see that.
Does that work for you? Okay. So basically, what I'm saying here is that this is our demographic. This is our robots, and this is from a conference I think from a couple of years ago, actually. So it's not really out of date. It's the same story today. I think a lot of what people overlook is that you can kind of look at SEO as robot usability, and robots are not quite human. They're getting smarter, but they're not quite human. And unfortunately, we can't really interview what Google thinks of our site. I mean, we might not care what Bing thinks about our site based on our analytics, but we probably do care what Google thinks of our site. And one of the things that companies do all the time, and when I'm called for consulting, I see it all the time. They'll spend tons of money on doing usability tests for humans, tons and tons of money, but they won't pay for an SEO audit until it's too late, until they already have a problem. And that's probably a mistake, because then you have to call Alan again. Not, yeah. he'll do a great job, but what you really want to do is get this stuff right, if you can help it at the get-go. And I hate to bring up that dirty word, faceted search, again, but it's one of the more recent examples of what you really don't want to do. And it actually ties into a few concerns. I mean, number one, bringing up site speed. If you don't do something to prevent rogue crawlers from going around your site, and I don't know what all of the approaches are, but I know a few of the valid approaches. If you don't do anything to stop these rogue bots from China from crawling your site occasionally, and trust me, they're out there. These Chinese robots, I don't know where they come from. I don't know who's writing them. I don't know what their aim in life is. It seems kind of pointless. But if you've been the webmaster or tech lead for a site, you'll know when these robots hit you. They'll open about 32 connections at the same time, crawling your site as deeply as it can. I don't know what they're doing with it, probably spamming with your content. You will have a site speed problem. And lo and behold, in Webmaster Tools the other day, I logged in and I saw a report from Google that basically said, oh, on November 5th, not November 5th, February 5th, I forgot what month it is. On February 5th, we had this problem spidering your site, and we couldn't even get to robots.tech, which stops us from getting to your site at all. And what that means is, like Alan said, you might want to be proactive and look for these things and have something called a honeypot that kind of tells you if someone's really aggressively crawling your site probably without intent and just bogging down your server, because these things are very hard to detect. Sometimes the energy that you spend in detecting it can actually be worse than the problem itself, so you have to be careful. But you do want to block some of these rogue robots, or else it will degrade your site speed. And since site speed, it's kind of difficult to prove, but since Google said it, since site speed is a legitimate ranking factor these days, and these rogue bots can slow down your site, especially when you open up this spider trap of faceted search, it can become a problem. Now, the most obvious thing that you might think that you can do, because Google listens to it, and I mentioned robots.txt, is you can exclude these rogue bots from robots.txt. The only thing is these rogue bots don't care. And when you run into that problem, just adding a line to your robots.txt file won't do anything. And so you have to resort to more creative things. You can use an Apache directive or an IIS directive to send them to a 500 page. I'd be very, very leery of sending them to a 404 page. A 500 is a lot less dangerous, because if you do accidentally ban a legitimate bot, you'd rather serve it at 500. So be very, very careful if you're going to do something like that. But again, site speed is a ranking factor, and things like faceted search, which open up a plethora of links, effectively infinite content, which was something that I think Carter Cole brought up. You want to be careful what you serve and who you'll serve. So that's I think a neglected topic. I know it's something that I've dealt with over and over again. I'm kind of curious if Alan dealt with it. It's something that comes up all the time for us, though. You have a robot that's rogue spidering your site, and it essentially can bring down, and unless you have multiple servers, but even with multiple servers, it can bring down one of your servers very, very easily. So I'm bringing that up because it's a topic that I don't think anyone really talks about. They talk about site speed, but they don't necessarily talk about the complexity. It's not just necessarily throwing another web server at it. It's not just necessarily, putting all your images into a Sprite or using a content distribution network, which I think, again, I agree with Alan, which is good. Content distribution is kind of a Band-Aid. I mean, it makes sense for a lot of things. But a lot of people just throw CDN at the topic. And they're just like, well, we have a speed problem, so let's throw a CDN. Number one, CDNs really only address static content. So if the content is coming from your server, if you're serving dynamic content, if you're serving content that comes from a database, like your products or your blog posts or anything that's not completely static, a content distribution network really won't do anything for you. Without a lot of sophistication, and certainly the commodity distribution network, content distribution networks like Cloudflare, might actually slow down some of your dynamic content because they're actually proxying that content. They're slurping that content up and then barfing it out really quickly. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. You don't have to be a computer scientist to realize what that means. That means there's an extra hop in between you and your customer, and there is no way, no amount of marketing will smooth over that problem. It is a problem. If you're not using a subdomain for your content distribution, you are making a mistake, and you are probably degrading the experience. I don't know what Cloudflare, I don't know how they justify what they claim, but there is no way that doesn't degrade the customer experience of your the experience of your website for customers. If you serve any dynamic content at all, it should really, your content distribution should be on a subdomain. That's another thing that I haven't heard said in a lot of places, and I hope it's a nugget of knowledge that maybe strikes the tune of common sense that maybe people aren't investigating. But there's this whole faceted search thing, and this thing keeps on coming up because I guess because I like it, not because anyone else likes it, possibly. But this is a very, very important form of navigation that's appearing more and more, and Google is very, very mum on the topic. It came up in a few interviews with Matt Cutts. I forgot which ones. I think Eric Angie, I think, brought it up at one point, and Google's very, very quiet on this topic. But there are a bunch of tools you can use to attack the problem. I think there's in the parameter handling tool, I think it was rebranded. I forgot what it's called now. You can actually say a parameter is a filter. But that's ultimately a band-aid. What you really want to do is you want to selectively serve certain of these pages to robots, and that's a challenge, and that's something that I've been dealing with for a while. There's a great SEO Moz post on it by terrible with names. I'll bring it up in a few minutes when I pull it up on my computer. But one of the best quotes, and he's not here, but I wish he were. Adam Audette, which is he's a well-known. I wish he were here. SEO and on the tech side. Maybe we can get him here next time. One of my favorite quotes is this one, and I hope you can read it because I love quotes like this. I think it says, I'm having trouble reading it, but faceted search sucks for bots. That's a quote. It's 100% true. If you don't do anything to address that concern, you're going to create a spider trap. And spider traps for a long time now are regarded as a big problem for robots. And the reason why, and this is a great example, the reason why it's different for a human and a robot is that ultimately humans have intent. Robots don't. A robot doesn't have a need. A robot doesn't enter your website knowing that he wants a blue corduroy shirt. Robots don't wear shirts. Robots don't care. And until robots, and this is strictly unless you start graying the area between what an indexer and a robot is. A robot will basically crawl every last bit of content it can. It might do it in a certain order. It might try to prefer the content that's only a few levels deep versus very, very deep. And that's part of the reason people say that, I don't know, it's not really true as much as it was anymore, but that's one of the reasons people say that you should not, or SEOs say that you should not go 10 subdirectories deep, because the assumption is that they should crawl the shallower content first. But inevitably what happens is that if a robot hits faceted search, it doesn't enter it with intent. It will just, and I've seen this in the logs, it happens every time, it will just crawl ad nauseum, and eventually it will give up. So in the worst case, what you do by introducing this technology that's great for humans, and I think Endeca was the first technology company to popularize it, and the big box stores got it first, like Home Depot, Best Buy, and a few other major players. Amazon got into it fairly early. Unless you do something to address these concerns and sort of give the robot information sent and guide it to the right content, and if you don't close off the the huge number of combinations that you can address, you can get a blue corduroy shirt with that's on sale. You can get a blue corduroy shirt that's from this or that brand, and these are queries that don't actually fulfill a need that Google has. What happens is, and I love throwing this. I love this slide when I gave it at SES. You end up with something like this, okay? And I'm seeing it backwards actually on my screen, which is driving me crazy. But whenever you see something with an exclamation point out of a math, it means it's large, and that's what a spider trap is. If you just serve these pages to Google, it will crawl them and then eventually give up. And the worst thing that can happen beyond that is not that it won't get that content. It might actually not know where your good content is, and it might not crawl your fresh content that isn't faceted search because you've busted through your crawl priority and you don't have enough page rank for it to you don't have enough signals that indicate that it should crawl you very, very deeply and waste all this time. So you might actually, not only will you cause these pages not to get indexed, but you will cause other pages not to get indexed. And that's a huge problem. And again, this is one of these topics that you don't really see addressed by SEO at large, because ultimately it's a programmer's topic and it's a mathematical topic. But a lot of these things are common sense once you think about them. It does make sense that a robot does not have intent, and a human does. A robot doesn't enter into a room with any sort of objective. Its objective is to crawl and index the world's content. And that's a little bit too ambitious when you're dealing with something that's millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and probably even billions of pages in some cases. If you have an e-commerce store with, let's say, 100,000 items, you look at Best Buy, you look at Amazon, they all have 100,000 items or more. And this is a significant problem that still doesn't get all the attention that I believe it should. And I hope people are actually interested in this, because not only can you hurt yourself, but you can also help yourself by highlighting all this content that is good, and sort of giving the robots the sense that they need to know to index the right content. Because you can also use that to power your PPC campaigns. You can use that for your organic campaigns, and indexing the right content can really, really help you achieve rankings with the long tail, especially. So, does that all make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
We got it now.
Was it very nerdy?
Yeah, a lot of nodding going on. I wish we had a camera on the crowd for you. Were there any specific questions for Jaimie from what he was talking about? No, but there's a lot of heavy drinking, Jaimie, going on. Hold on 1 second. Here's one.
Oh, that's us. Jaimie, yes.
Hey, Jaimie, this is Marty.
Yeah.
Hi. So CDNs, what about CDNs in video? I mean, if we've got a huge file, like a video, that can destroy page speed, isn't that a pretty good argument for CDNs?
Oh yeah. I mean, my criticism of CDN was nothing other than that people are throwing at problems just kind of blindly. There's certainly I didn't mean to say that CDNs are in any way bad for specific purposes. You definitely want to use a CDN for video, and video, especially when you're, I mean, for sure, this conference right now, or this meetup, for sure there's a CDN that Google administrates to minimize the amount of paths that this video will take to various users. That was one of the original purposes of CDN, to stream content to users all over the United States without multiplying that bandwidth that you use times the amount of people that exist. There's an optimal way of doing that, or an optimization method that lets you send it only once to several people. I don't know exactly how it works, but certainly Akamai, I hope I pronounced that right, and all these CDN guys do. Certainly for video it makes perfect sense. The criticism I have is that people will frequently view it as some sort of bullet point, that even if they have an e-commerce site that barely has any video, they start throwing all their images up on a CDN, and really that's not. I mean, there's a lookup cost to that DNS. There is a definite downside to using some sort of solution like Cloudflare, which is one of those buzzwords in the CDN community right now. And Cloudflare will be a band-aid over a slow website, certainly, but it's not going to address your going to address your dynamic content.
I'll share my favorite CDN story with you. My site was so slow that the CDN that we use actually cached our 404 page, and so I had to open the window of the picture taking by the CDN from their normal 1 second to 8 seconds, or else my 404 page, and in fact my 404 page got ranked out of the whole deal. So thanks.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Good snickering.
At least I've made the expert laugh.
Any other questions before we move on to Carter Cole? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you can come over.
Okay, so there was a statement that was made that if you serve any dynamic content, it should be from a subdomain. And I thought it sounded like a good quote, so I tweeted it. And then some people replied back to me.
No,
and
no,
said,
no, 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 no.
I think you mean static content.
Yeah, I might have said that backwards. If I said that, I apologize to the gods of the internet.
Sorry.
Please redact. Don't quote me on that one, because I definitely don't want to be heard saying that. What I meant to say, and I hope I say it correctly now, what I meant to say is that if you're going to use a CDN, you should use it for your static content, your non-dynamic content, and then put that on a subdomain. So you might make images.mywebsite.com a subdomain served on a CDN to get your static content out there very, very quickly. The reason you can only really use a CDN properly for static content. Anything else, I'm sure there's a way to use it for other things. I'm sure you can get it to work for dynamic content, but that's probably very expensive, and these CDN companies, unless you're huge, won't want to talk to you about it. It's very, very complicated to do that, because how do they know when the content changes? It's just not viable. So that's what I meant to say. I would also add that sometimes using a subdomain, at least with older browsers, I think this has been changing over the years. Browsers will only open a certain amount of connections to a particular domain or subdomain. And sometimes, even if you don't have a CDN and you know your web servers are kind of beefy, you want to put them on a different subdomain, just because it'll cause the browser to multiplex more connections. But I don't do that myself. I mean, it's something that I know, but I don't necessarily waste time implementing that. You'll certainly gain just as much by throwing all your small images in like a sprite file. I think it's very, very annoying, but it actually helps a lot, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to open 50 connections to download 50 little images. It's much better if you can make, and I mean, I don't know if everyone knows what a sprite is, but I think it comes from old video games where they put a whole bunch of little tiny images into one file, and then just basically move the little window of what they're going to show to the various sections to show the right section. So you can put all your little images, all your little bullets, all your little arrows, all your little, I don't know what else you would use, but arrows, dots, bullets, any small thing that isn't a photo into one file. So basically you turn those 50 images into one image. And that is a huge savings in terms of page speed sometimes. And you don't need a CDN to do that. You certainly need some patience, but you don't need a CDN for that.
Everybody know what a CDN is? There were some people online that didn't. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and it's a way of putting your static files, especially, at different places all over the world, so that if somebody, thank you, if somebody from Europe makes a request to your site, they get served from Europe. If someone from Asia, they get served from Asia. So it helps speed up page load times. Jaimie, have you used Cloudflare?
Not on anything in production. It's certainly, I don't want to sound like I'm panning Cloudflare. I find the idea is flawed. From a computer science perspective, from a network science perspective, there's no way it doesn't add extra latency to your non-static content, to your dynamic content. Let me not flip those words again. If you're going to do it, if you're going to do a content distribution, if you're going to do anything like that, what you should do is do it for your static content. Your videos certainly are a great candidate for that, because certainly Apache is not meant to serve static content effectively. You can also, though, I mean, you can get some of the benefits of a CDN by just having another web server that's optimized for static content. That is one of the other approaches. It's certainly better in some ways and easier to maintain in some ways. There are web servers other than Apache that will serve static content in a much more efficient way. And going down to the nuts and bolts of it, it has to do a lot with whether or not it opens a process or a thread for every connection. These web servers can multiplex thousands and thousands of connections, because really all it's doing, and it knows it's doing, is it's serving static content and just pumping out data. It doesn't need to use CPU time or execute lots and lots of instructions to start multiplexing between various threads and various processes on the computer. So you won't get all the benefits of a CDN that way, but if you have another web server just using one of these other If you have another server with an optimized web server dedicated to serving static content, that is a middle ground between not using a CDN and using a CDN.
I also want to. I just want to chime in real quick, if I can, as well.
Go for it.
Yeah. So there are other considerations when you think about content delivery networks. One is the security issue. You're storing content on a third-party service network, and all of the security ramifications that includes need to be considered. And then there's business continuity. If that content delivery network provider goes out of business, what are you going to do?
Or if it goes down.
Yeah, or if it goes down, right. Yeah,
Netflix, I mean, that was convenient. Amazon took out Netflix on one of the best days of the year, or heaviest traffic day. I think it was Christmas, wasn't it? I think everyone was watching movies, and Amazon just blipped out. They have their own video service, which, you know, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you might be a little suspicious about it. I certainly was. If you rely on one of these guys, you can get wiped out for a day, and you know, as much as that speed matters, you might not want your videos to go down on Christmas. Probably a really bad thing. So one of these things with software as a service and infrastructure as a service, you have to worry about not just business continuity. That's certainly a huge concern. I don't think Amazon's going to go out of business though, but it's going to really suck if you go down during Christmas, and there's nothing you can do about it. Amazon probably regarded them as a regular customer. I don't believe in the conspiracy theory, but it was kind of inconvenient for Netflix.
Well, it wasn't just Netflix. When their cloud servers went down, and it's happened more than once in the last year, Netflix, Pinterest, and literally thousands of other corporate websites that rely on their network were gone, dysfunctional, partially functional, or not functional at all for an entire day.
Is anybody here using Cloudflare? What do you think of it? Right. Yeah, I think, so he said it improves stuff for him, but he's a small fish. And I think for small fish, Cloudflare can be effective. It's actually free, so you can try it out. I've tried it out on quasi-heavy sites and didn't see a huge increase. But it's worth checking out and testing. Somebody had a question. Yeah? Right. Right. He's talking about all of the things that are dependent on your website on third-party services, from your Facebook like button to everything else. Working in the newspaper industry, we were very reliant on ad networks that had to bring in stuff, the horoscope network, the obituary network. Everything was a network that was bringing stuff into the newspaper, so it becomes very apparent working in that industry. And if you rely on that stuff and it goes down, like these guys were saying, you can really get screwed.
And that's also, yeah, and that's also directly tied to page speed. One of the other common scenarios I see, we live in a widget-based world now, and if you've got 5 widgets, everyone coming from a different network, there can be page speed conflicts there as well.
It has to do with, I'll pop in there, like some of the well-behaved scripts, that they will carefully be written to be asynchronous. And what that means is that even if they're down or even if they're slow, what's going to happen is that part of the page won't load. And that's probably okay. It might be distracting if it takes a little while to load and, you know, kind of pops in later. Everyone's seen like the Ajax Flash where it comes in a little later. But a lot of these widgets, and a lot of them are guilty of this, will be non-asynchronous or synchronous, I guess. And what they'll do is until this little widget loads to let everyone know how awesome you are, the rest of the page won't load. And they can't really. I've actually seen it entirely take out websites. You'll just see a waiting. Everyone's probably seen it. They might not have really thought about it, but you'll see a little waiting or loading symbol or, you know, text at the bottom of your browser. And the whole, like in terms of computer science, that'd be called blocking. There's a blocking operation that's preventing the rest of the page to load. And I know this because I've developed these asynchronous services. It is much harder to develop them that way, and maybe you can count on Facebook doing it that way. Maybe you can count on Google doing it that way. But a lot of the smaller software as a service services will blow up when there is a problem. And little tidbit is that Google Analytics even wasn't asynchronous until probably a couple of years ago when they introduced the asynchronous snippet. And I've seen Google Analytics, if you put it at the top of the page, I've seen it totally block the loading of the website. And
Yep.
you know, it's really awesome to know who visits your website, but when it doesn't load, you got a problem. So it can degrade your experience big time. These hosted services can really kick you out.
All right, time to move on to Carter Cole. Carter is development. He's going to we've been getting a lot of questions online about WordPress, so he has graciously said he'll talk a little bit about that as well. Why don't you put that on?
Okay.
You only have to hold one.
Are you gonna get my slides?
Yes.
We need the slides. They comfort me. Okay, so I think a lot of this stuff is really putting your best foot forward to Google, and a lot of the things are also, I hate to use this, but low-hanging fruit in deciding what's going to be the biggest impact to fix. And so, waiting for my slides. So a lot of it is figuring out what's going to really matters for your site. Every site is different, and so you're going to have to say, you know, okay, you know.
Just keep going.
Okay. Okay. So I guess the first thing I can talk about is one of the questions that came in was about page speed and what's a good page speed and what's a good page speed score. And it's like that low-hanging fruit thing. I've had clients that we had a Google page speed score of 80 and they wanted to get it up higher, and I was like, really? There's not much value to that, but they wanted it done anyways. But Google originally said that it was like 1.5 seconds was a good page speed time for loading. If you have some of the shared hosting, they can be slower. You know, it's really they're looking at stuff that's egregious, like 8 or 9 seconds. You know, if you're within 2-3 seconds, you should be fine. But still going. And then a lot of people have questions about WordPress and CSS and what they have to pay attention to for WordPress. And for most WordPress sites, I think you're really not going to have to worry about it. You want to make sure that your CSS comes before any JavaScript. As he was saying earlier, JavaScript is blocking. So when a web browser is interpreting the content for the website as it's going through the HTML, if it sees JavaScript, JavaScript can change the page, and so it has to stop and wait until that JavaScript finishes executing before it can do any of the other stuff on the page. So if you put your CSS first, the CSS can all download in parallel, and it can be rendering and doing all the CSS stuff, and then your JavaScript can fire and be doing all of the page mutation stuff, so that you're downloading everything for your website as fast as possible. As far as page speed, again, we had problems where, like, we were calling the Twitter API because we wanted to have our recent tweets and things like that. And we went as far as building caching servers that would basically make all of the requests for all of the different things. It would get our Facebook feed, it would go get our Twitter feed, it would get all those JavaScript objects, and it would basically bundle them all up into one cached call. And so then when, instead of the website having to go and load Twitter and Facebook and all these different disparate APIs, some of them being very slow, we would have a cached version of, you know, our Twitter feed and our Facebook feed that was, you know, up to 30 minutes old, but it would come from our server and we would deliver it and it would be super fast. And so those are ways that you can kind of get around dealing with third-party slowness, and it's fine. Okay. Okay. So, okay, the next thing I want to talk about without my slides is soft 404s, different ways that you can set up IIS, which is really common. It's Microsoft's web server. You can have pages returned that are your 404 page that say, sorry, we didn't find it. But the way that the server is configured, it's actually returning a 200. So to Google, that looks like it's a valid page because the status code that's actually coming across through what Google sees is a 200, and they don't see the 404, even though you think you're serving a 404. And that can get into what's called the infinite space problem, where Google starts seeing huge amounts of pages on your site, and they don't want to crawl it. They have essentially an indexation budget, and they look at how many links you have in and how important you are and how often you update your content, and they decide how much processing time they want to allot to your particular domain. And so with things like faceted search, where there's query string parameter, oh, we got the slides. It's good. Okay. Okay. So, okay, I'll now go into my shameless plug. I'm Carter Cole, and I wrote SEO Site Tools, and it's got like 96,000 users, but it could also have more, so you should go and install it. And it's awesome, and it pulls in a lot of these different things that you can look at. Okay, so this is query parameters. Really, I recommend query parameters are everything in the URL that's after the question mark. So I'm going to get really geeky with y'all. I love to see code in slides, and so I guess my goal for this is to y'all to have kind of a cheat sheet that you can take back to your developer and say, do this stuff. So the query string is everything that happens after the question mark, and so you want to get rid of those. And faceted search usually has a lot of those where it's putting in all the different filters that you've selected. And like you said, the different combinations can make a lot of different URLs. And then Google will essentially spend their crawl budget crawling all of those different URLs when you could have them say, this is the canonical version, or a lot of times people will pass like a session ID in the URL. You don't want to do that, but if you absolutely have to do that, or your developer says there's no way to get rid of it, this is a screenshot from Webmaster Tools where you can basically tell Google, ignore this query parameter. We don't want you to think that any URLs that have this query parameter are separate URLs, and it'll let you get around a lot of different problems that you can have with some e-commerce stores and things like that that'll pass query parameters, and they'll start making extra pages that'll use up your crawl budget that you don't want to happen. Soft 404, as I started to talk about, apparently Google thinks that my website has one soft 404. It's probably wrong, but Google Webmaster Tools will actually show you if they think that they're seeing soft 404s, and that'll a lot of times happen when they see a lot of 200s that have the same content on them. Oh, can I not click anymore?
Can you escape out?
Oh, there we go. Something that happens, so another thing that a lot of developers don't pay attention to, whenever you're making redirects, usually the default will be to be a temporary redirect, and that's a 302 redirect. Google wants, if you're going to pass essentially the juice for the links that you're getting, you want to have 301s. And so different things can happen where you will try to redirect between the non-www and the www version of your website, and then maybe they forgot the slash, and your web server will automatically redirect to the folder with the slash. And so this is a screenshot of a tool that I wrote, but it lets you see all the different hops. And so Google will say that we're not going to really follow redirects past 4, and we only are going to pass juice if they're all 301s. So if you have a 302 anywhere in the chain, then all the links that you have earned to that first page aren't going to make it through because Google sees the 302, 302 is temporary, and they don't want to pass it through.
But I think that's really worth taking a moment to everybody this one.
Okay.
Because your programmers read their manual, and it says the word temporary.
Yeah.
They believe that's okay.
Yeah. So he was saying that we should really point out the difference between a 301 and a 302 redirect. And
here's the way I
yeah.
I don't never use it.
Yeah, you really, there's very, very few cases when you want to use a 302. Really, the only time you want to use a 302 if there's pretty much no way that Google will ever get to that page, and so there's no way Google will ever see the 302. So,
well, the backstory is 302s were a very common spam tag, and so they just essentially got completely overused in the early bad black hat days. And so as a result, anybody that was anywhere near a 302, Google still just flinches whenever you use it. And so it's just not a good idea.
yeah. So generally, stay away from 302s. 301s will pass your juice. They do evaporate a little bit of juice, and so I'll talk about whether you want to use 301s or the canonical tag when you're dealing with duplicate content stuff. So are we clicking now? Okay, so here is the canonical tag, and this is something that is really like one of the first things that we look at when we're first doing an audit for a client. But Google doesn't know the difference between the www version of your domain and the non-www. Because technically those could be two different sites, Google has to treat all of them as separate sites. And a lot of times what you'll see is half the links will be earned for the non-www site and half the links will be earned for the www site. And so you want to make sure that you have this canonical tag in here, because basically what this does to Google is it says, this is the authoritative version of this page. If you have any links going to this page, they should actually, this other page should get credit.
Yeah, let me give you a real life. We had one product in the business that Phil and I were saying that was 50% of the profit. And so we put that product everywhere. So we had with this one product that was 50% of the profit of this website. It's about a $6 million website. So you're talking about $3 million. And you better believe we had that product everywhere. But we canonicalized it so that Google understood we only wanted credit for one of those pages.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we would have had a tremendous duplicate content penalty and just been knocked out of the box. So that's kind of a real world example.
Yeah. So you'll see things with the canonical tag where websites are ranking against themselves. You'll see all kinds of different things. And really, just adding this canonical tag to almost every single page, I think you should have it on every page. You'll just get a boost, and the rankings will all go up because suddenly, instead of the page having 50 links on the www and 50 links on the non-www, suddenly you have 100 links for just the www or just the non-www, and that page will start ranking really well. Yeah. I wanted to hit on the difference between what robots.txt and robots meta tag is. The robots.txt is a much earlier directive that Google had, and it was really just to say, we don't want Googlebot to go here. And so the other presenters talked about it, but Google will actually, you can robots.txt something out, and if there's enough links to it, Google will still show it in the search results. And it won't have the full snippet. It won't have its description, and it won't have anything except just the plain link because the things have been robots.txted out. Google has gotten much better at detecting when they think that you screwed up on your robots.txt. They'll actually send you messages in Webmaster Tools, and they'll actually show it now in the search results page. The Democratic National Convention had a robots.txt that basically said, don't index us. And so you could go to Google and see that it said, robots.txt said, don't index any of this site. We've had people who, WordPress. Big thing on WordPress. When you're first installing and it says, do you want search engines to go to it, you want to click that. Because if you don't, WordPress will put the robots.txt in there that says disallow everyone, and nothing will get indexed. So you want to make sure that your robots.txt isn't getting rid of stuff. But the robots meta is a new directive that they've given us, and it gives you a lot more granularity and control over what you want Google to do. And so that's a meta tag. It goes in the head of the document. And it lets you say, okay, Google, I know you landed here. I don't ever want to show this page in the search results, but I want you to follow all the links on this page, and they should probably get into the search results. So that would be a no index follow. If you don't want Google to look at anything on the page, then you do a no index, no follow. It gives you a lot more control over what you want Google to actually do. And it lets you, robots.txt is, I guess you would say, a stupider directive. It's more like a brunt force tool than you can do with robot meta. Another thing is URL rewrite. If you can implement it, it's really good. Humans like it when there is a really simple keyword-rich slug in your stuff. This is an example of htaccess, and I think I pulled it. This is a WordPress rewrite. But if you get rewrite, you can get your keywords in the URLs. It gives more signals to Google about what that page is actually about. And it helps users because they see a pretty clean URL. There's one thing to note. A lot of people ask what the difference in the URL is between an underscore and a dash. And Matt Cutts has actually made a video about this. But in the early days, when the Google nerds were writing all their stuff, they wanted to be able to search for code. And so a lot of times in code, you'll use underscores to mean a space. And so they wanted to be able to index different, like some word underscore some other word, and that be one thing. But then the dash, they treat as a word separator. So if you use an underscore is for like one phrase that's all together, but a dash is for like shirts dash red. And so Google will treat things that have a dash between them as separate words. They'll treat it as a single word if it has an underscore. So really, they've gotten better about it. They say that it's almost none of their queries get affected by this, but it's something to pay attention to, that there is a difference between how Google treats underscore and dash in the actual things. So really, I guess now I'm going to talk about robots, and all Google is basically a big giant crawler and an algorithm, and their crawler is storing a copy of your website on their servers. And when they do that, they're indexing it. And so this is an indexation graph from my website where Google crawled a whole bunch of stuff and then stopped keeping it because they didn't think it was all of value. But Google has gotten very good at doing things like indexing links that are in Flash. So it used to be that Flash, none of the search engines understand it. Really, only Google still understands it, and they're not very good at it. But if you have a Flash site and there is some content in the base movie of your Flash, Google can kind of read that. Google has also gotten much better about if you have a link to something through JavaScript. In the past, Google couldn't follow those links, and that was a way that you could do your advertisements or things where you didn't want the link to pass rank through. You'd use JavaScript instead of just a regular link. Google now, for inline on-clicks, are indexing those things and using them. They're also, they used to not submit forms. Now if you have a little drop-down where it's like select a category, Google is starting to see those things and crawl through those things and use those. So you have to pay attention to, how your forms get submitted, how users are going to use it, because Google is slowly getting better at indexing JavaScript and kind of pretending to be more of a human. We talked about page speed a bunch. This is Google's official page speed. They took page speed out of Webmaster Tools. They used to have a pretty little graph. A lot of the big things for page speed are, if you can, turn on gzip compression, make sure that your images are sprited. If you run this tool, it'll give you a whole big list, and you kind of basically say, okay, what's the easiest to implement? But I wouldn't say there's any one score that I look for. It's more if I'm seeing indexation issues or I'm seeing a poor user experience, then we're going to go look at the page speed. I think that it as a metric is starting to grow. but in the past, Google has said, really, unless your websites are neck and neck, page speed isn't going to matter. Schema.org, Google is moving towards what they call the knowledge graph. And it's less just keywords and more understanding what the data on the web pages are actually representing. And so schema.org is a way for them to try to parse the data that's in a web page easier, to understand what objects and things are on the web page easier. This really matters for things like e-commerce sites. You can mark up your rating system with schema.org, and Google will start to show extra things in the search results. So if you want those really pretty stars in the search results, use schema. Also, when you're doing your breadcrumbs on your site, if you mark up your breadcrumbs with, there's a breadcrumb markup, it's also similar to schema. Instead of just having a plain URL in the search results page, they'll have each jump with the name of the category in the result. And so these give you more space on the SERP and usually entice users to click on it more because they see stars or they see different things where it's rich data, they can see the location or the company profile or whatever, because Google is able to read this and understand, like this is an example of a person. And so if you look at this, you can't see any of this markup from a user perspective, but Google sees these item property, address, locality is Seattle. And now they know that this person who's named whoever is in Seattle. And so when you're doing searches in Seattle for whatever, this might come up more because people have marked this up with the schema properly, and Google knows a lot better about what's going on. Then you also got to think about Facebook. Yeah, okay. So Facebook, whenever you share on Facebook, and Facebook does those pretty little pictures where it has the description and the title and the picture, you can actually pick all of those things. And so I actually did a post that was like it's cloaking, but it's not bad cloaking, where originally Facebook pulls the meta description. Whenever you share a URL, Facebook does a request to your server for that page, and they go and look at all the images on the page, and they look at the meta description, and they look at the title. And so you can either show the Facebook bot a different thing, which is what I was doing with the cloaking, or you can use their new open graph tags. And that lets you write up all kinds of stuff about how you want that entity to be shared on Facebook, what image you want it to use. In fact, if you don't like the picture that users are picking when they're sharing your stuff, you can say, this is the image we want it to use, and it'll always use that, and it won't let them pick anything else. And so it lets you kind of control how your social shares are doing. Yeah, you're not duping anything. It's all just what Facebook sees and what Facebook shares. And so the reason I was doing the cloaking is because Facebook originally pulled from the meta description and stuff. So I wanted to show one thing to search engines, but then when I'm sharing, I'm going to use a lot different language and try to use more human terms to get people to click on it. So the SERP needs to show one version of the meta description, and Facebook needs to see another, or you got to use these open graph tags that they've given you. Is that the last one? I think I'm done. I think so. Yeah. So, nerd out. Okay, we got questions?
Actually, oh, that's on your pocket.
Oh, this is...
Yes, tied to you. I had a question and a comment. A question was about image sprites. Is using sprites, you only get a benefit from that if you're referencing images multiple times on a page, or can you still get some benefit if you only reference those images once?
Should I take that, or I don't know? I talk about it. It's up to you.
I think let me go, and then if you want to add something.
Okay.
So The biggest thing with image sprites is that round-trip HTTP requests are really expensive. And so even if you're only using the image once, and it's once this little icon and once this little other icon, there can be 20 of those. And that's 20 round-trip HTTP requests where you're basically wasting server resources. If you have Apache, you can only have so many connections open. And so when you sprite things, spriting is just putting all the images together using CSS to only show the little thing. You only make one request. And so you turn 20 requests that took, 2 seconds into one request that took half a second, and you see a big boost. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, the reason I piped up was because actually I think the only time that it wouldn't matter is if you request the image twice. I think you only get a benefit at all if you're requesting a series of different images. Once Firefox, Chrome, whatever, once their caching mechanism, as long as the image is cacheable, which is another thing that people might want to bring up, which is that you probably do want to make sure that these images have a late expire date. You're not going to get any benefit at all as long as you do that, which is something that you should do, even for that sprite image. You should probably just change the name of that file and set it to expire when the Terminator comes to the Earth and we all die. 2039 in Unix time.
Yeah.
When Skynet comes, that's when it should expire. Otherwise, you should probably, and this is something that Yahoo kind of brought out the most of any company. If you can just change the file name in your CSS when something changes, when your file changes, when any of these little images change, it's probably a better idea to do that. Even for small files, if you have to use small files, you want to do what's called, I forget exactly what the technique's called, but you want to late expire it. You want to make sure that image is not requested by the browser, because what the browser will do is it'll ask the web server, did you change? No. Did you change? No. Did you change? No. And it'll do that for every resource, every static resource on your website. So for all the little things and things that won't change, you could do, something I've done is just say, oh, well, an hour's probably fine. And if I'm wrong about that, then that's cool, because it doesn't matter probably. And if they hit refresh, it'll fix itself. Not everyone can do that, but for a lot of things with an Apache directive, you can speed up your website a lot just by throwing an htaccess file in a directory and saying that everything in this directory won't change for an hour.
Yeah.
And that does improve the experience without too much work.
And that's another page speed thing that you can see when you actually run the Google page speed, is they'll say you're serving up these images, they're static images, but they aren't being cached. And so by default, IIS and stuff won't cache those images. And so you just want to make sure that either the web server is saying these are cacheable, don't request them every time, make sure they come through once. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in and say there's a plugin, if anybody's using WordPress, called W3 Total Cache or something like that, that will actually write out exactly what Jaimie was just talking about, kind of that caching timeline that then gets uploaded into your htaccess. So it kind of takes all of the hard work out of it, because it walks you through step by step and gives you best practices for it. Yes? I have not used SEO Presser as a WordPress plugin. Have you?
I haven't.
Have you guys used that plugin at all?
I think All-in-One SEO and SEO Ultimate are really the main two SEO plugins for WordPress. So.
All-in-One SEO is good. Yoast is the best to stay up with when it comes to an SEO plugin.
I agree with that, Alan, as well. Michael? That's the whole thing.
With 301s, 301 redirects actually don't lose any more link juice than a normal link. It used to be thought that it did because of the damping factor and the calculation for page rank. It's like 0.85 or something like that, and everyone thought that links that are 301s will lose 10 to 15% of the juice. But Matt Cutts has just recently debunked that myth and says that 301s don't lose any more juice than a normal link.
Alan is, of course, checking that right now.
No, yeah, it was literal. It was just literally this week. So I guess yesterday that came out, or it's really recently that came out. I never put much value or concern in quote lost juice. I hate the term juice. I think it's obnoxious. I think it's obnoxious, but that's beside the point. That's a separate rant for Twitter. When it comes to the value, if a 301 is the proper thing to do to send the right message from a user experience perspective, that's what matters. So you should never have even worried about the juice that you lost.
I got another.
I would also add that Matt Cutts probably said it the most confusing way possible. I'm not sure exactly what he says. Everything he says kind of has some inconsistency in it just to confuse you. I believe on purpose, but
that's his job.
I got another 301 question. When can I take one down? I mean, over time, my site goes.
It's hard to say. Google is really. Sorry. So the question was, when can I take a 301 down? And that's a really common problem, especially whenever you're moving a site. Chrome and Google, that's why they want the 301, is because supposedly that's permanent and they can trust it forever. But really, best practice, I would probably say, is try to leave it up. It doesn't really hurt anything to leave it up in there, but it can get crazy. But after a year, I think you can probably take it down. But if Google should know the first time they crawl that all that juice passed through, and they might come back a couple more times because they don't exactly trust the 301s all the time. But really, if you can leave it up there indefinitely, I would leave it up there indefinitely, because I wouldn't worry about them, really. So the question was, what if you have pages that don't have juice? I wouldn't worry about them. Really, what I'm doing when I'm 301ing is making sure that users are going to have a good user experience. So if there's a page that doesn't have any links, but I know a lot of users might have a bookmark to it, and they're going to return to that page, I don't want to give them a bad experience of getting a 404. And so I'll make sure that those 301s are in place. But really, the other thing is when I'm moving a site, I'll go to SEO Moz's top pages, and I'll look at what the top pages are. And really, I'll do the 301s for the ones that I think have the most linking root domains, because that's really all I care about. Make sure we pass the juice through. And if we have a poor experience for some users, but I really, as an SEO, care more about the links. So
I'm gonna chime in here if I can.
Yeah.
I need to respectfully or not respectfully disagree with you.
Please.
I said early on in my portion of the discussion that you can't rely on tools to get the right information to you about what has authority or page rank or value compared to the way you might have in the past. So it's a flawed theory to trust the tools that you're using to determine which pages you care about redirecting. Another consideration is this: if we're gonna look at the notion that you have 20 pages, why bother figuring out which ones to redirect or not? It's a waste of your time. Just redirect them all. It's proper best practices. If you're on a 20,000 or a 500,000 or a 50 million page site, yeah, we could start talking about some of the decisions about how much energy you're going to put into it. But the ultimate reality from my perspective and my recommendations are always redirect. Don't try to granularly figure out what you have the right or need to redirect and what you don't, because you don't ultimately know what's going to cause an impact. If you've got 20,000 pages and only 5,000 of them from your evaluation are valuable, the truth is those other 15,000, if they were indexed, they were valuable enough for Google to consider them to be indexed in the first place, so they count. You shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater playing those games. It's a dangerous game.
Are
you done?
I guess so. Do you have any more questions?
Are there more questions for Carter? CarterCole.com. You get another one? Hold on, we got another question coming your way. For Alan?
Alan, you were talking earlier about errors in CSS and in CSS and HTML, and that would influence the ranking. Is it really a quality issue? Does it just give errorless CSS gives you a high rank, or is it just if you have too many errors in Google just gives up on you?
No, it's not it's not directly a quality issue. It's a crawler efficiency issue and an algorithm confusion potential issue that matters when it comes to CSS and markup being as clean as possible. You want to make the crawl process as efficient as possible, and you want to make the algorithm's ability to understand what's going on as clean as possible. Those are the reasons that I encourage and that I recommend focusing, at least to a certain degree, on validation.
Any more tough questions? Because if not, I'm going to make Jaimie come back to his computer. What, do you get someplace to go, Jaimie?
I was making coffee.
We're in this all night.
Just 4 more hours. I swear that's it.
Ah!
But I wanted to give both Alan and Jaimie a chance to plug their sites and their services. Who's up at now? So Jaimie, you're up on the big screen. Jaimie, is it Egghead SEO or SEO Egghead?
It's SEO Egghead, and I guess I can do a screen share and bring up our company website. But ultimately, my pitch is that we're who you talk to if you want to deal with faceted search, or if you want to deal with faceted search-related problems. That's not necessarily the most popular SEO concern right now, but I think it should be. More and more, these things are becoming an issue. We're also bringing out a beta product for hosted faceted search that we think works a lot better than the competition. There's even some patents involved. And if you do have an e-commerce website, especially an e-commerce website that needs faceted search, and you also want to build landing pages for the long tail and for PPC, then you might want to contact me because we have a beta program that would interest you. But I can certainly do a screen share and show you our company website or demo our faceted search products if anyone wants to see that. But if you know what faceted search is and you know you want it, let us know.
And now Jaimie is excellent at Google Hangouts, so he can share that with you when you call him tomorrow with a huge check.
Yes, call me with a huge check.
Call up, Alan. All right, Alan, you're next up. Here's your pitch time.
All right. We got me on screen here?
Indeed.
All right. Can you see this here? Yeah. All right. Yeah, there you go, right there, okay? It's at Alan Bleisweiss and alanbleiweiss.com. I specialize in audits, as we've discussed up until this point, from mid-size to massive sites. So whether you've got 5,000 pages or you've got 50 million, I'm comfortable with it. Yeah, I can do audits on smaller sites, though I'm not necessarily likely going to be able to be affordable to you in that scenario. In that case, I can refer you out to others in the industry that I trust for their audit work. And it's quite likely that when my audit is done, there are going to be recommendations regarding the need to clean up your faceted search. So that's way, in that scenario, you get to call Jaimie. There you go.
And the last but not least is Carter Cole, who has the cheapest product because his product is free still, but maybe not much longer.
Install SEO site tools.
I just did it.
It works.
It's
So,
free. I can't resist.
Alan and Jaimie, you guys are officially dismissed. I am now going to dismiss everybody who's here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Everybody take care.
Thanks, Alan.
Everyone take care.
Thanks, Jaimie.